All right, guys, Professor Hildebrandt here. This is the third and final lecture for Chapter 4 on supply and demand. If you haven't caught the other two yet, go back and do so. In the first video, I talked about the consumer side of the market, so I covered demand and its characteristics. Then we talked about, in the second video, supply. So we have to think like a firm and how firms would make decisions. But they come together, and this is the important part of the tool that we use for the purposes of our macro class, and they create a market. Everything in this chapter is critically important to understanding so much of what we will do in the remainder of this course. So, essentially what happens is supply and demand come together in what we call a market to find mutually beneficial exchange. And so the bringing together of my demand and supply curves is what's going to determine what we call price and quantity in the market. And so very importantly, we have two concepts here: equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And so equilibrium price is the price where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So my QD will be the same as my QS. So where the two are equal, that's my equilibrium price. And then the equilibrium quantity is simply that quantity at the equilibrium price. So whatever this is where they're equal, that's it. X marks the spot, okay? It's really not too hard as long as you understand the basics of a graph. So going back to the pizza example that we've been working on in this chapter, we now have, we looked at a demand schedule and we graphed our demand curve, this blue line here. And then we looked at a supply schedule and we graphed our upward sloping supply curve, the red line here. Well, now we call it a market schedule, so we're bringing it all together. So the first column is the price of the pizza. The second column then is how much quantity consumers want to purchase at those prices. The third quantity then is how much would be supplied. And so hopefully you can find equilibrium two different ways. If you look at the market schedule, again, you're just looking for the price in column 1, where the quantities in 2 and 3 are equal. And so hopefully you see that that's right here. At a price of $9, we would have a quantity of 20 million pizzas per week. Also, we could look at our graph and look at that price of $9. I know that that's my equilibrium because, again, I said earlier, X marks the spot, right? At that price and only that price, our quantity demanded and quantity supplied exactly equal. So that is our equilibrium. Some terms I haven't used yet, so let's go ahead and toss those in, are a surplus or a shortage. So a surplus exists when we have excess, we call it excess supply, too much quantity supplied. So a surplus will exist if price is above equilibrium. So at prices above $9, such as 12, if we go over, we would see that at that price, quantity supplied is 24 million, but quantity demanded is only 14. And so that is a surplus of 10 million pizzas a week. So this is how our markets operate. This is what Adam Smith was talking about when he said we would have these invisible hands, these unseen forces that would push resources to their optimal use. Because what a surplus signals to price is price, you are too high. So if price were to be $12, that fact that we have a surplus signals to the market that price needs to drop. Okay? Looking at the other side, if price is lower than equilibrium, such as $6, then we end up with what is called a shortage. You should also be able to calculate for me the size of a shortage, so you should be able to compare quantity demanded to quantity supplied and tell me that that shortage is 10 million pizzas a week. So we don't have enough. At that low price, consumers want to buy more than firms are willing to sell. Again, it signals to the market, guess what, market? Your price is too low. You need to increase. So this is how our markets function. Again, I kind of already talked through this, so just quickly, that surplus is excess quantity supplied, and it's just the amount by which my QS is greater than my quantity demanded, and it signals to price that price needs to drop. Okay, so price needs to drop. On the other hand, a shortage is when we have excess quantity demanded. So now QD exceeds QS, and we know now that price needs to rise in order to combat the shortage. Because the market, on its own, y'all, the market wants to be in equilibrium. And so that's our goal. So we talked earlier in this chapter about things that change demand, right? We had 5 factors that change demand, and then there were 5 factors, different factors that change supply. So when that happens, it changes our equilibrium in the market. Okay, just really quickly drawing this out, just really basic. If I had demand, supply, I'm going to label these D1 and S1. So here is my equilibrium, P1, Q1. Okay, if something causes demand to increase, shifting to the right, consumer income goes up. Okay, we shift to the right. Consumer preferences change, we shift to the right. We think our income is going up in the future, we shift to the right, to D2. Well, notice that E1 is no longer equilibrium. At E1, at that price of P1, my quantity supplied will not have changed, but my quantity demanded would be way over here, okay? So instead, price needs to increase to P2. We have a new point of equilibrium. We have a new increased quantity, okay? So if demand increases and there's no other change in the market, in my new equilibrium, we will see both a higher price and a higher quantity. On the other hand, if we see demand decrease, they both go down. At the end of the day, though, I would do what I did up there. I wouldn't try to memorize market changes. I would simply draw the changes in your graphs. That's going to be the best way to figure out how the market adjusts. So again, here's the change in demand. Over here in panel A, we're showing an increase in demand. So we increase from D1 to D2. Price goes up, quantity goes up also. And then over here in panel B, we're going to show a decrease in demand because both of them are going to go down for the decrease in demand. Well, then let's talk about supply for a moment. What we will see now when supply changes is they're going to move in opposite directions. So I'm just going to draw this one down here and then I'll show you in a graph. So again, let's just start with our basics. Okay, here's my equilibrium. Great. The price where quantity demanded and quantity supplied are the same. Okay. And then supply decreases. So it shifts in towards the origin. My origin is down here to S2. Okay. I have a new point of equilibrium, E2. A new higher price. So price increases. But a lower quantity. On the other hand, if supply were to increase, we would see price drop and quantity increase. And that's just what these graphs here are showing you. So if you need to pause the video for a moment, make sure you can understand that if supply increases, price drops, quantity increases, whereas if it decreases, the opposite is true. So again, pause if you need to look at these graphs for a moment. Okay, I'm going to ask you some review questions before we move on to the last part of this chapter. So, got a market for chewing gum. My current price is 50 cents a pack. We're selling 100,000 packs a day. Which of the following would lead to a new equilibrium of 60 cents and a quantity of 90,000? Okay, I'm not even going to look at my options yet. I am wishing that I had thought to put a white space board in between, but I didn't. So we're going to make do down here in the corner. Here we go. Hope y'all can see this okay. So I'm going to draw it kind of small. So here's my market. Here's demand. Here's supply. Okay. In my current equilibrium, this is what the problem tells me. Price is 50 cents. Draw it in. 50 cents. Quantity is 100,000. I'm just going to write it as 100. 100. So my quantity is in thousands. Okay. That's my current equilibrium. Something happens. One of those factors changes. Which one? We don't know. That's what we're trying to solve. Okay. What we do know, and this is often what happens, we don't always know, oh, consumer income went up and then this happened. Instead, we go, oh, here's how price and quantity changed in this market. What caused it? And so we have to work backwards, okay? So what we're told is in our new equilibrium, our price is 60 cents. So that's up here. It's higher than 50. And my quantity is 90,000. Well, that's down here, lower than 100. So where do these two things meet? Let's see. Well, they would meet right about there. I'll call this point A. Okay? We're told that point A is the new equilibrium. See? New equilibrium, point A. So the question then becomes, how do we get from point B to point A? What would cause us to move along the demand curve? A change in supply. That is what would cause that. More specifically, we need supply to shift to the left to S2. So we need supply to decrease. So we're looking at our 5 options and we're looking for what would cause supply to decrease. Again, how am I going to rule some things out? I'm going to start by finding anything that I know talks about demand, and that will not be the right answer. So I look and it says, I'm just going to start at the bottom here. E, an increase in income. That impacts demand. Not what I'm looking for. D, an agreement by workers to work for lower wages. Okay, that's a resource. Workers in that industry, that does impact supply. We'll come back to you. A decrease in the number of young people in the population. That's demand. Young people are more likely to eat a lot of chewing gum. That's the demand. An increase in the price of ingredients, key phrase, used to make. Great, I know that one's supply too. Okay, we're going to keep that one around. An increase in the price of other kinds of candy. Like Skittles, chocolate. How do those relate to gum? There's substitute goods. And substitute goods is also demand. So A is not going to work. Great, y'all, we're down to a 50-50 shot here. Let's see if we can figure this out. B, an increase in the price of ingredients used to make chewing gum. So the sugar or some other ingredient we need has gone up. Well, let's think back. What did I tell you? Anything that makes production cost go up makes supply go down. So supply decreases. What was I looking for? Looking at my graph, I was looking for something that would cause supply to decrease. I really think B is my answer. If you're running out of time, great, take it and move on. If you're not, though, make sure, double check yourself. Look at D, an agreement by workers in the chewing gum industry to work for lower wages. That means production costs go down, and so supply goes up. And supply going up is not what we were looking for, because that would have been a shift to the right, like to S3, which would have meant a lower price and a higher quantity. My answer here is B. So we talked about one side of the market changing, but in reality, we can have more than one factor impact the same market at the same time. And we call those simultaneous shifts. So here's the hard part of simultaneous shifts. You will know for certain what happens to either quantity or price, but you will not know for certain what happens to the other. It will depend on which side of the market changes more. So look, if both supply and demand increase, I know quantity will increase. However, I do not know exactly what will happen to price. It depends. If demand increases more, price will increase. But if supply increases more, price will actually drop. And then the opposite is true if they both decrease. So what am I going to tell you to do? Once again, draw a graph. But more specifically this time, I'm going to recommend you draw two graphs. So let me show you. So here we have supply and demand, and we're going to show a shift of demand dominating. So you can see demand jumped over a lot more, okay? And then in my second graph, I'm again allowing both to increase, but this time the increase in supply, whoa, that was a lot compared to this minor increase in demand, okay? Well, what happened to my equilibrium? Well, in graph A, looking at P star, that's what we call equilibrium price, we went from P to P prime, so that's an increase. And we went from Q to Q prime, so both of them went up, okay, because demand shifted more. But look at graph B. My price this time, P to P double prime, actually decreased while quantity still increased in the market. But again, instead of trying to memorize what was on the previous slide, I would always recommend you draw your graphs. You allow both changes to happen in both graphs, but in one graph, demand is the dominating change. In your second graph, supply is the dominating change. And this just shows what happens when they're decreasing. So again, feel free to pause your video and take a look and make sure you understand what would happen there. They could also move in different directions. If that's the case, you'll know for certain what happens to price depending on the directions of supply and demand. You will not know for certain what happens to quantity unless you do what? Draw your graphs, okay? And again, your textbook gives you this little chart, but I wouldn't try to recommend it because there's still all these question marks in the chart anyway. If you really want to know what happens to your market, you're going to have to draw it out. And, okay, yeah, I'm going to skip that question so we can finish up really quickly. So disequilibrium is when our plans don't match. It's usually temporary, but it can actually be caused by government intervention. And so that's what we're going to look at is types of what we call price controls. Okay, so we're going to look at the government's price controls and how that would impact a market. So last topic for this chapter. So we have two different types of price controls. The first one is called a price floor. This is a minimum legal price, and you cannot sell a good below that price. So you have to have your price set above that legal minimum, okay? And what we're going to see is that it has to be above equilibrium price to have an impact. Let me show you why really quickly. So here's my supply curve. Here's demand. This would be equilibrium in the market, a price of P1, okay? And so if the government says, okay, here's our price floor down here at P2. So this is the price floor. That means everything in this shaded red region below P2 is illegal. These are all illegal prices down here in the red region, okay? So you say to firms, hey, firms, you cannot charge prices down there. Firms go, okay, we won't. We'll just charge equilibrium P1. But notice if the price floor was here at P3, now it has an impact. As a matter of fact, a price floor is going to create a surplus because my quantity supplied will be over here, and that will exceed my quantity demanded, okay? A price ceiling is our second type of price control. This is a maximum legal price, and you cannot sell your product above that price. This time, it has to be set below equilibrium price in order to have an impact. It is going to create a shortage, and both of these distort our markets and reduce economic welfare. Here's two classic examples. For a price floor, we see this often in agricultural products. So the equilibrium price for a gallon of milk would be $1.90. The government sets a price floor at $2.50, making $1.90 an illegal price. You cannot charge $1.90 for the milk. So what happens is we have a surplus here of 10 million gallons of milk every month. What do we do with it? We don't bring it to market because then that would change our equilibrium. So we pour it out or we give it away or we do something with it. But we're not selling it, okay, which is very wasteful. That's why we say it reduces economic welfare. The classic example for a price ceiling is actually called rent control. So some cities, especially like New York, still have areas where your property owners are not allowed to determine the price. We see in equilibrium, the monthly rent for this apartment would be $1,600, but the government says you cannot charge rent higher than $1,000. So what does it do? It creates a shortage in this market because more people are demanding, here's my QD over here, more people are demanding those apartments at $1,000 than my property owners are willing and able to supply. So again, these distort the markets. Not going to get too deep into this, but so why do firms do this? Or why does the government do this? Well, again, it goes back to chapter 1 and that idea of unintended consequences of public policy actions. They start the price floor in an agricultural market to try to help farmers because their products have prices that are inherently unstable. Okay. And B, rent control. Why do we do a price ceiling on rent? Because we're trying to help lower income family have affordable housing. So there is a reason the government institutes the policies, but then there's often secondary effects that maybe weren't thought of originally. Okay, that's all I have for this chapter. And if you guys have any questions, please let me know.